known about Jane Austen and her life, besides the fact that she wrote many romance novels that are still around today and that everybody still loves and reads. Today, we're going to uncover some of the secrets about Jane Austen's life. This is Uncovering Jane Austen by Kristen Hunter. Today's objectives are general biographies, Jane Austen's family, Jane Austen's education, Jane Austen's life, Jane Austen's works, and her impact on the world. Some general information people tend to know about Jane Austen are as follows. She was born December 16, 1775 in Steventon, United Kingdom. She died July 18, 1817 at the age of 42. Jane Austen wrote 7 novels total, plus her earlier diaries and notebooks published later under the title Juvenilia. These were some of her earliest experimentations with writing as a child. She specialized in romance novels and satirical comedies mostly. Some interesting information most people don't know about Jane Austen's family are that her parents were Reverend George Austen of the Steventon Rectory, who also farmed and taught when the family needed money, and her mother, Cassandra Austen. Jane Austen's siblings, from oldest to youngest, are as follows: James, Edward, Henry, Cassandra, Francis, George, Jane, and Charles. Henry was the closest to Jane and later became her agent. Cassandra was Jane's only sister, and this fact forced a close relationship between the two. The family in general was very close and open. They focused a lot on learning and creativity. The family was also very humorous and lighthearted. They often put on little plays amongst themselves, which nurtured Jane's imagination and creativity. Many believe this contributed to her later becoming an author, as she learned a lot about writing and improvisation from these plays. More interesting facts are Jane Austen's education. At the age of 8, she was sent to boarding school to learn the traditional skills of the time, as most girls were. When Jane returned home, she would learn what she could from what she read. Her father, being a reverend, had an extensive library that was always open to her and Cassandra. Jane also learned as much as she could from her brothers, and whatever they could teach her, she would try to make use of. After being born and educated, Jane would come home, and by 1787, Jane began writing in notebooks, and as more time moved on, she began to take it more seriously and love it. In the December of 1795, Jane fell in love with the nephew of a neighbor, but the neighbors disapproved. They felt that the Austen family had nothing to offer the marriage or their nephew or the family in general, so they kept the lovers apart, and Jane Austen never saw her lover again. In the December of 1800, Jane's parents retired and moved the family to Bath. Later, in 1802, a close family friend proposes to Jane. Jane knows it's advantageous to her and her family, so she decides to accept. But the very next day, she breaks it off because she states that she absolutely hates men and finds him despicable and completely disgusting. A lot of people believe that this close family friend resembles a character from Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Collins. In January 1805, Jane's father dies and the family is thrown into turmoil. The brothers agreed to support the women in the family, of course, because if they had not, they would be forced to face poverty. But this fact makes them move around a lot between the brothers. Finally, one brother buys them a cottage, and Jane makes great strides in her work there because the other women realize that she wants to write and leave her to herself often and help her with her chores. Finally, after many publishing failures, Henry convinced publisher Thomas Egerton to publish Sense and Sensibility in 1811. The book was very successful, and the audience could not get enough. Pride and Prejudice follows suit and is equally successful. Mansfield Park is published next, this being the most profitable and successful of all Jane Austen's books. The Austen family faces crisis again after a bad bank venture made by the brothers, and the second edition of Mansfield Park falls flat. In 1816, things continue on a downward spiral as Jane's health begins to decline. She continues to work on writing, but in May 1817, she is so overworked and stressed, her family is forced to take her for medical treatment because she's bedridden and unable to work anymore. July 18, 1817, Jane Austen dies in Winchester, United Kingdom. Her family publishes her remaining finished work, and her publisher reveals her true identity, previously unknown to the public, in a very heartfelt note in one of the books that he published. Jane Austen's works are as follows. Sense and Sensibility was written and published in 1811. Pride and Prejudice came a couple years later in 1813. Then just a year later came Mansfield Park in 1814. And another year later came Emma in 1815. Persuasion was written in 1811 but published posthumously after Jane Austen's death. Northanger Abbey, also written in 1811, was published after Jane Austen's death as well. The Addition was published in 1817, and Juvenalia was published well after Jane Austen's death, and as I said earlier, these were her earlier experimentations with writing as a child. Jane Austen's impact on the world. Many books and movies and TV shows are based off of Jane Austen's original romance plot. People all around the world are still reading Jane Austen's novels. Not much is known about Jane Austen, but I hope this presentation has helped you learn a thing or two. Jane Austen wrote many great romance novels that are still being used and spun to create new romances today. And even though romance eluded this great, hopeless romantic, we can still cherish her great romantic heart today. The sources for this project are as follows.